And we're lucky to have her here tonight. Let's give a warm welcome to Amy Call.
As an empathic and sensitive adolescent, Amy Call was hastily diagnosed with bipolar disorder and sent home with a heavy medication, which caused complications and pain, cascading into an increasingly complex cocktail of medications which weakened her body and over the years put her in constant pain and sleeplessness. In 2003, she stopped breathing altogether and found herself in another realm that changed her life. She spoke about her near-death experience to South Bay IANDS in Saratoga, California.
The prayer that I had been praying since I was a little girl, 4 or 5 years old, I used to pray over and over to Heavenly Father, please let me be a tool in thy hands. Because I felt that I would not be satisfied unless I could be helping people with their suffering. And so I would pray that prayer over and over. And when I hit this, against the wall point, I felt myself collapsing inside in every way. And I remember one day just kind of falling to my knees, and it was very spontaneous. I wasn't thinking I'm going to pray even. It was like my whole body was giving out, and I went down and I just started to say, it was like a surrender prayer. And within the context of that prayer, I felt myself saying, I know nothing. Because I didn't know how to make sense of anything anymore. I couldn't see how there was order in the universe. I couldn't see how there was anything but chaos on the planet, and things just didn't seem fair. I didn't understand why some people who didn't seem like good or nice people seemed to have it smooth, and people who seemed really, really good would sometimes suffer desperately, and no matter how much praying, and not that that's the case all the time, but I couldn't understand anymore. So in this prayer, I was saying, I know nothing. And there was this feeling of release in me when I said that just kind of let go, and it was like everything in me just agreed to that. And I gave this intention or thought to God where I said, I need you to do something now. I don't want to go on and hurt my kids because they have this mom who's not there. If my mind shuts down and they have crazy mom or whatever, they're going to get hurt, in whatever way. That frightens me. You can't be crazy mom. And I was so afraid for that. So I said, I need you to take my life in whatever way, if it's in an accident or whatever way you deem it. And if you don't will it to take my life, then I need something else to happen, like a miracle. I need you to change something now because I can't go on this way anymore. I knew I was at the end of something. So shortly after this prayer, we went through a move, and then we were at the new house, and I was sitting with my youngest baby who had laryngomalacia, where the throat isn't done developing when she was born. And the doctors told me, once I took her home, they said, you can take her home, just don't let her cry because the throat can fold in on itself. And so she was this newborn, and I was supposed to keep her from crying while I was kind of a train wreck myself. And I had three other daughters who were all little at the time, and the stress was just so tremendous. And I remember sitting with her and holding her, and she was 3 months old, and this was in 2003, and she hadn't been a particularly cheerful baby because I was always very nervous with her because I didn't want her to cry. And so I know my own nervousness in trying to make sure she had everything she needed, and I was taking care of everything. I'm sure she was picking up on my nervousness and my anxiousness and how tired I was. And so I hadn't seen smiles and laughter from her at 3 months old. And I'm holding her, and at this point my husband is in the back room of our house, and he was reading. I don't know if he was studying or he's reading in the back room. And the older 3 girls are in bed. And while I'm holding her, I felt this peacefulness. Now, right before this happened, I had gone to see a doctor, and I had said, I'm at this point where the pills aren't working. I can't do it anymore. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can feel something really bad is going to happen if I don't get help or something doesn't change. And the doctor had said, I have something. I think you can try this. And he said, what we found, this isn't typically for sleep or pain, but we found that for some reason it seems to help. So I want you to try this. And I was nervous because I'd never really had good reactions with medication. I'd always been sick, and I'd never enjoyed medication. So I remember taking it home and kind of shaving off a tiny bit and taking it and realizing right away that I couldn't breathe out of my nose. And of course that made me nervous because I like to breathe out of my nose. And I also sleep with my mouth shut, and I'm very determined to have it shut. I don't like to breathe out of my mouth when I'm sleeping. So I didn't take what he told me to, and I ended up going back to him and telling him, I'm nervous because I can't breathe out of my nose. And he said, Amy, you have a stuffy nose, okay? You're in this much pain. You're saying your mind is shutting down. Take the pills, you know. And so while I was holding my daughter, I just thought, I have nothing to lose at this point. I'm just going to take the pills. And there was this darkness that started folding in on the room, and it was very, very dark. And it sounds like maybe spooky or scary or whatever, but it was actually a beautiful feeling. And to me, it would be similar to the idea of having a comforter wrapped around you. And it was just, it was very warming inside and calming. And when this was happening, a light came right directly above us, and I was in the middle of the room in a one-story house, and this was nighttime, and there was this light coming down, and it was just a soft glow, and it came right over my daughter's face. And she, as it came over her face, she giggled suddenly, and it was almost like the kind of giggle a baby has if you tickle them. And she closed her eyes and fell asleep immediately. She was just asleep. And so I stood up and I walked her to her crib, and I put her in, and I walked to my room, and I just had this sense of calmness, like, it's okay, Amy, whatever happens, it's okay. And I took the 3 pills that he wanted me to take, and I laid down on the bed, and it was probably maybe 9:30 or so, and I took the pills, and immediately my nose closed off, or I couldn't breathe through my nose, and my mouth was shut like normal, and so I wasn't breathing through my mouth, and I couldn't move. And I was very aware that, oh my gosh, I can't move. It happened instantly. I mean, it seemed like it's just very shortly after I swallowed the pills, this was what was happening. I couldn't breathe, and I was thinking in my mind, oh my gosh, I can't breathe, I need help. And my mind just starts doing this spinning, thinking, what do I do? But there was literally nothing I could do. I couldn't flinch a muscle. And so there isn't much to say about this part other than there was that racing. And I probably, after a couple of minutes, I know I reached that place where I knew if you're underwater and you know I can't be underwater any longer, or I'm gonna breathe in the water, I hit that place, and all of a sudden there was a suction that felt like it was coming from the top of my head and pulling out like a vacuum. And I wasn't struggling anymore, and I wasn't trying to breathe, and it wasn't necessary, and I was coming through a portal. I know I've heard other people talk about a tunnel, but for me, I mostly remember coming through this open portal. And as soon as I came in, the situation to me felt very normal, kind of like if I just walked in this room and people were just walking in through the doors. And I didn't have a reason to, oh my gosh, you know, am I dead? And in fact, I don't know why I didn't think of that. I think I've said to people that it felt so normal there. I didn't really have a lot of clues around to tell me, you know, you could be dead, but I didn't, that's not, you know, the fact that I might be dead didn't come to my mind. And I was also just kind of interested watching people come in, and everyone was just dressed like how, you know, normal people dress. And one of the things that started happening right away, and I don't know why I wasn't weirded out, I didn't have a lot of the whole fright thing. Like in life, I tend to be kind of a nervous person or sensitive, and I question, you know, that was my past, how I was. But for some reason in this space, I felt kind of calm. So one of the things that happened was that you could communicate and understand each other. Like if someone gave the intention to say something, it just flowed, and I could understand right away what people were communicating without the way we hear things here when we talk to each other. People have said this is called telepathic, and this is kind of what it felt like, but it didn't seem weird to me. It seemed probably more normal than when we talk. This feels more heavy and like we're in a struggle compared to what I experienced there. So that was going on. In this situation, I was just noticing different people, and there was a man who I, for some reason, felt that he was like a mentor or a teacher from how I sensed him. And I ended up going over to him at one point and kind of asking him what is he here for? Like trying to figure out who is he? And my understanding was that he was kind of like a mentor, and part of what he had mastered in his life was humility. And I hesitated even to share that with people because I bring up the word humility from how I understood it there, and it doesn't necessarily transfer to how we see it here, because humility there's, I don't know, before I might have thought like this bowing or I'm meek and small, but there it wasn't. The humility was just, there was a confidence. In fact, there was more confidence in this calmness and honesty and pureness, and he had that. And when he was in this space with these people that were there, it was almost as if he was like a tuning fork of what humility embodied for these people that are here. And he was telling me that when he's here, in a way, it's as if he's teaching, but I never saw him teach, so I'm not sure that I can say that he had taught, like, getting in front of people. But he was helping them to get past themselves, so that they could see in a different way. And one of the things I understood about this space that I went into was that these people that were there, I would use the word suicide, but their suicide is seen a little differently than how I had understood it before. And one of the things I understood from there was that, at least in the place I was in, was that a lot of these people that were coming in, they had ended their own lives, even if they didn't mean to necessarily get to that place. They, in one way or another, took themselves to their deaths. And for example, there were a number of boys that came in together, and I knew right away they had been in a car wreck and that they had been drinking. And so it's kind of like that's taking a risk, and so it's sort of suicidal risk, kind of thing. There are a number of different situations, but so he was here to help those people. And I remember moving into a different space where, now from my background that I come from, is a lot of black and white. This is this, that's that, this is what's good, this is what's evil, this is right, this is wrong, this is the correct political way, this is the correct religion, this is not. So it came to me as I saw another person who I felt this mentor quality to, I can ask, and so I went to this person, moving to this other space, and I remember coming up to him, and I didn't even need to start spitting out, my question, even telepathically. It's just as soon as my mind thought of how I wanted to get an answer on, what's the true religion, what happened is I immediately was inside of his mind, because it was like I could see myself from his place, but also from his higher level of wisdom and experience. And an interesting thing happened where I was able to experience from his place, me coming up and wondering what's the true religion, and I could feel his mind, how he understood me. And from his place, it was as if a little kid came up and said, which kind of cheese is the moon made of? Jack, cheddar, or Swiss? And he was really sweet actually about it. He didn't even really answer me. In fact, there was something I understood there to be about respecting how we want to see things. So even if I thought the moon is made out of Swiss cheese, I think they would have been like, I don't know that they would have said yes or no. I can't say because I didn't stay there, I came back. But when this little thing happened and he kind of smiled at me and it was just sweet, he wasn't making fun of me or saying you're such a silly little toddler. He just smiled, and I remember his head slightly bowing and this love emanating from him. And to experience myself from his view, it blew everything, like my whole foundation, everything I'd come from, it kind of just pulled it out from under me, because now I'm going, oh wow, the moon it's not even made of cheese. Not that I thought that, but it was like, okay, it's not even about religion, like, and yet from his place, there was this peacefulness about it, so I didn't have to really freak out even, because I could feel from his place what that was. Then continuing on to this other space, there was a young woman who came up to me, and she got very close to my face and was talking very intimately, and I wasn't sure why she was talking to me that way, and I didn't know who she was, but she had very particular features and a very distinct look. So I was just being polite and listening to her, and she started saying things like, well, tell them this, tell them that, and she was giving me information, and she was saying things about how she had died, and it wasn't just, in particular words, not all of it was in words, but I could also feel, like when she was sharing how she died, in a way it felt like I could, oh yes, I could feel that empathetically in a way. So she's sharing this information and saying, tell them this, tell them that. I didn't know who she was talking about when she said tell them, but I was being polite and listening. So that happened, and all of this part of my experience was around what I call the portal area. Now, there's a whole other part of my experience where when I came back to body, I struggled with how do I say what happened first and last, but I'm going to kind of close up the portal area experience now. When I was talking to the mentor, the first one, who had this quality of humility, and I was kind of like, okay, so what is all of this here? Like, why are these people here? And he said to me, they're deceased, or I had this understanding they're dead, or they died, that's why they're here. And I felt struck suddenly, like, oh my gosh, okay, so if they're dead, then what am I? And that's when he gave to me an understanding that you're not exactly the same as the rest of them. And I don't know how to put that to words, if it was like I had this understanding I still had some life left in me, or I'm not going to be staying here. So I just took off and left, and it was just my will, like, I'm out of here, and that was it. And so that's one part of my experience. Now I go into the other part of my experience, and I'm not going to say this was second or first, because in the end it kind of feels like maybe they're almost different parts of me experiencing different things. But in this other experience, it was totally different, because I didn't have the whole identity theme. In the portal area, I was me, I'm Amy, and I'm looking at, you're you, and that's that person. And there was all still, like here, the ideas of duality and things like that, individuality. And then in this other part, I'm with my guide, and I'm out in the universe. And in this part, it feels like I have my own sense of beingness, and I still have me in a way, but it's not a focal point anymore. And I have the symbol of a tree, where it's kind of like if you are like a twig off of a branch, off of the trunk from the seed. And yes, you are that twig, and yet at the same time you have access to the whole tree. And I felt this oneness with everything, and this was really neat for me, of course, because there was so much information access And all my life I had felt, confused and things seemed chaotic. And in this other part, all of a sudden I was connected to everything, and yet at the same time I also belonged so much. I was special. I had this value that was, I was the most important being in the entire universe, and yet so was everyone else. One of the symbols that I had coming back from my experience, I had different symbols. It was like an old arched stone bridge, and there's a piece in the middle, I believe called the keystone piece. And I felt that's, in this part of my experience, that's who I was. In the sense of the universe, I had this understanding that's who I was, and yet I knew that that's what everything is also. And when I was in this space, time and space was also kind of different than here. It's just everything was all at once, and what I could feel in this universal place was that there is perfect order in everything. One of the things I understood was that there's math in everything. That's just math in every single thing that existed, and nothing was outside of this math. And even things like a little bug traveling across the room was within this beautiful divine math. And it may sound maybe a little silly to be talking about an NDE and then bring up math, and especially for me, because in my background, I had such a mental block with math, and I did not like it, and I didn't want to hear it, and my poor dad tried to help me with it, and I couldn't. It just was too much for me, because I was always a feeler, and if I couldn't be inside of something and feel it and be one with it, like the empathetic person I was, I couldn't grasp it. And in this part of my experience, I was the math, and I was part of it, and it was so perfect and so orderly, and there was no chaos. And so I knew that on our planet, despite how in our little tunnel vision things may look chaotic or out of place, or we see suffering and we think that's not fair, from where I went, and I had access to this bigger picture, there was no chaos, and there was order in everything, and to be able to be part of that, it was a gift for me. And so my guide was with me, and there were actually, it may sound cheesy, but like equations that were moving, and it was like I was just getting this whole understanding that it's okay, there is a math to this, and I also had this understanding that science was a part of all of this, which is another kind of ironic thing, because we think, or maybe I would have thought, I'm going to have an NDE, then it would be magical. That's how an NDE would be, but or ethereal, and really it was very, very grounding to have this math and this science come in. There was like the stars and the planets and the moons and everything worked in this beautiful clockwork design that was perfect, and I had this understanding of the planets and the stars, that everything above reflects at some level energetically everything below, and everything below is reflecting everything above, and even inside of us, that what the equation we are within ourselves is reflecting certain things that happen around us on the outside, and it's kind of difficult maybe to see from here, but it's all really happening, and there's sense to it. And so for me, this was a huge breakthrough, of course, and a relief, and it was, of course, an emotional experience, because I could rest in it. I knew finally that I could rest in this knowing that everything was okay. I had a life review, and I don't know exactly in what context to put my life review in, and I didn't even really know to say the words life review right away with mine, but after hearing a couple other people's, after my NDE, I didn't even know what had happened, and I wanted to find out, am I crazy or what? So I started searching for things like possibly dying, maybe coming back, or I was trying to figure out what it was, and found out the term near-death experience, and there were people who talked about life review, so that's how I get some of these words, but I don't know that I had anyone say you're going to get a life review, or But in this life review, my guide was with me, of course, and he was with me through this whole other part that I'm talking about. And this was probably the most loving part of my experience, surprisingly for me, because I think I would have been, before my NDE, worried like, oh man, it's going to show when I got into my mom's underwear drawer and took some change, and it's going to be really embarrassing, you know, things like that. Because I took some change and bought Scholastic books in elementary school without asking. And I'd done a lot of things. I'd been kind of nasty when my sister wanted to borrow, clothes, because I was just like, these are mine, like there were things I wouldn't be proud of. And in my life review, it was just so incredibly loving. And in this review, I could feel myself from a number of levels. And part of what I had access to was this universal love, or we could, if we could say God. I felt this love of God toward myself in the life review. And so as I was experiencing myself in this, I felt this compassion for myself, the way that maybe a parent would feel for their toddler, when your toddler's running down the hall and they just started learning to walk and they biff. That was kind of the way I felt toward myself, when things weren't so great, or if I wasn't totally awesome. And then of course I felt the times where, I was heart-centered and loving and made a difference in people's lives. And but I didn't have anything in it where I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so guilty, or where anyone was reprimanding me. I didn't have it like that. In this review, I connected with a person in my past, and this is interesting for me because I didn't realize that I had gone into my near-death experience still holding this feeling toward this person. When I was younger, I had witnessed a situation with someone who had been doing someone else wrong, and I was a child, and this was a very difficult situation for me because I suffered with the person who was taking the abuse, and it was something I had such a hard time getting over. I assumed I had, because I told myself, well, I forgive because that's what I'm taught. But I think I really judged that person, thought this is an evil person, and I had so much anger. And in this life review, I was able to connect with this person who I would have said before, that's my enemy, even. And when I was connecting with this person, I could feel this person's full potential at core, and who this person really is beyond all of these things that she was part of. And I could feel the love of the divine for this person, and I was part of that. It wasn't this separation. It was just this stream, like this river running through me, and I'm part of all of this love. And the feeling of love that I had for this person that was my enemy was just so huge. It was almost heart-shattering in a way. And so this was, of course, kind of an awakening moment for me to realize if the divine loves this person who I saw as my enemy and could do something like that, how can I ever not love anyone or anything again? So when I came back from my NDE, I even ended up, one of the first things I did is I wrote her a letter telling her how much I loved her. And I was crying, and there was this sense of relief in me too, because I had been carrying something that I didn't even know I was carrying, and what I was carrying in my feelings toward this person it was like something stuck in me. It couldn't be born and it couldn't die. It was stuck in me, and it was a heavy, yucky thing, and here I was now just loving her fully, no matter what. So that was something that was special for me. Also in this part of the experience, I saw the planet Earth among all these other planets and moons and stars kind of pull up in front of me. And above the planet, and the colors were just incredible. I I've said to people how we see the difference now. We have these TVs nowadays that if we compared it back to, say, the 70s and the 80s, then we look at, we wouldn't want to go, oh, well, let's go have a 70s or 80s TV in our house once we have what we have now. And so in this experience, the colors and the vividness of everything were just so acutely, beautiful and almost alive. Like the colors and the light had life in them. And so coming back from my NDE, I see things now in comparison. There's just such a big difference. So above the planet, there were letters, capital letters, and the letters were Novata, and I saw this as Novata. And I heard a woman's voice at this point, and I didn't get a lot of audible, I would say, in my experience, I didn't get a lot of specific words, but at this point, I did hear this soft woman's voice saying the days of the week, and she just simply said them, except she said them in Spanish, like lunes, martes, miércoles, and she went through the days of the week and reached the 7th and said, prepare for the 7th day. Now, when I was looking at the planet, there was like an overlay in front of the planet, and it looked to me like what I would maybe call a spiritual eye, like this kind of an eye. And it was, when I saw the planet, it was like this, and then it slowly was opening up, and it embodied the whole planet. And when I was looking at this, I could feel the planet, and I understood the planet to be a being, that it had this spirit and this intelligence and this kind of a soul. And when the eye was opening, this was part of my near-death experience. I'm sorry I'm giving a lot of information right here, but it's part of my experience. Now, my guide took me on this little travel that maybe sounds like a Superman trip. So I don't know how to, my words always sound really cheesy compared to what it was. It wasn't cheesy for me in my NDE. It was a really neat thing, but I'm going around the planet with my guide and just receiving information and understanding. And as I'm going over different countries on the planet, I could feel that each country had its own frequency and its own math, and everything had its own special, really like a math or a tone to it. And yet it was all interconnected at the same time. And even within a country, each, like a state and provinces, or even down to neighborhoods and so on, everything had its own little specific note or harmony and math, and all together there was this like a kind of a music or this connection that made sense. It wasn't just this random, here's land here and there. So I just was really appreciating the planet and how, there's something so beautiful to it, and it's meant to work together. And while this was happening, I had this information given to me, and I like to be careful about giving information because I don't want to turn into anyone's new religion or prescription, or this is how you do such and such, because obviously this is my near-death experience. I know maybe someone else would have something different, but one of the things that I got going around the planet, I was given a warning that the food is not in its pure state, or that there was a problem with the food, and that there was a tainting, and that the food needed to come back to its original place, or that it needed to come back to a more pure state, and that this is very important right now on the planet. And I got something about Native Americans that we could learn from the Native Americans. There's so much, I really can't put everything out for the talk, but when I came back from my near-death experience, one of the things that happened with me right away was I started to eat very simply. I didn't, buy boxes of food with long lists of ingredients. I started, eating the potato with the carrots, and, the carrot doesn't have a list of, never-ending things on the back. And as I started eating this way, when I came back from my experience, I started healing. I started feeling better. I didn't have the experience of coming back and having like abracadabra, you're all better. And I know that would probably make it sound really cool, but I didn't. I didn't get that, and maybe part of it is because I need to learn, what helps, and but for whatever reason, that eating very simply and purely has been something that I've taken with me, and it's helped me a lot. And I got from that experience. When I brought up the word Novada, and I believe when I posted finally my near-death experience online and trying to be anonymous, Jody Long from the near-death website contacted me, and she would tell me once in a while, there's someone who would really like to talk to you. And one person she said that wanted to talk to me was someone named Gail Newhouse, and she said she really needs to tell you something. And Gail Newhouse talked to me about my post online and said that she looked up Novada and found out that it means a new birth or new beginning. And that was special to me, because I think that was the feeling I felt, not only for the planet and seeing this eye that was opening, but for some reason I also connected with that very intimately, because I had this NDE and I come back from it, and it was like my whole life began again, and from a completely different frame of mind. So I just thought I would mention that. Now I had my guide still with me, and he says to me at a certain point, it's time for you to go back. And when I was given that it was time for me to go back, I didn't have anything in me that agreed or even thought that it was a possibility. It was kind of like, I don't know, like if someone just held out a cup and I was like, well, no, I'm not going to be drinking that. So it wasn't something I agreed to, and at the same time, the very words or understanding of it's time for you to return, just thinking of the idea of leaving there and going back had me immediately go into a very deep, wrenching emotional state, because it was the idea of separation from this that I couldn't do. And so I felt everything in me almost like a heave. And I say me, but there wasn't, in this part of my experience, I didn't have like my body, like in the portal I could kind of look at people and things, and this part I wasn't really focused on my body, but yet I could still feel my feelings, and it felt like I just was shattering, like everything that was in my being was just exploding. And I started to cry, and I remember that when I started to cry, I couldn't even cry, because it was so deep that it was like explosions within explosions. I just really struggled at this part, and I felt the compassion coming from my guide, and my guide said, look to your left. And so I looked to my left, and I saw this little school bus coming up, and I'm watching, and I knew as they brought out one of my daughters. I have twin daughters who are identical, and they brought one of them out, and she was 4 at the time, and they walk her over to me, and she kind of just walks up to me, and she did this thing where she reaches up, and she said, she's smiling, and she has this cheerful disposition, and she says, but Mommy, who will take care of us? And in this situation, I was still part of this love that the divine is and has for all of us, and with everything in me that was not going back for anything, no matter what, and knew the kids will be fine, anything you say to me won't make a difference. Once she actually reached for me and requested that, in a way, who will take care of us, the love of what is greater than me that I also am, that's what answered her. Almost before she could finish asking, I was saying, of course I will. And then they led her back. And again, I began to cry, because just willing myself to leave that action was such a difficult one. So I was crying and saying, I don't know how to do this. It's like I understand, but I don't know how to do this. And I continued to cry. And my guide said, look to your right. So I looked to my right, and there was a holographic picture now, which is a little different than what I'd experienced with my daughter. And in this holographic picture, I was looking into the future at just one thing, and that was my mom. And it was from about the chest up, and it was up close, and it was a living picture. It wasn't just, some cartoon they made for me or a drawing, or something made up. It was the future. And I could see that my mom wasn't doing very well, that her health wasn't very strong, that she was fragile, that her mind was fragile. And I could see things about her that I knew my mom wouldn't like. She's always taken really good care of herself. She's a 50s girl and, has a certain way of doing things. And I just thought, she wouldn't want that hair right there, that her, she'd want her hair brushed, and everything in me started to just naturally reach toward my mom. It was just my will being part of that love that reached toward my mom, and my guide was saying, you see that it is you. It's, it was kind of like I understood I wasn't just getting kicked out. It feels that way in a smaller part of me, but the bigger part of me now understood that I was willing to go back if I would reach for these people. And so I had this understanding, and then the third time I started to cry again, and the planet's in front of me, and I said, I don't know how I can do this without you. And I kept thinking I was going to leave my guide, and my guide says, very well, and I look to my right, and there's like a spinning, and like a vortex spinning, and it moves into me, and my guide and I were one. And once I could feel that we were one, I have this understanding, reach toward the planet. And so I willed myself to reach forward, and I think this is the first time that the whole idea of physicality came in, because once I willed to reach forward, my fingertip started coming into view, like light, and then I could see the tip of my finger, and as soon as I reached toward the planet, it was like a fishing line went out and grabbed it, like electricity maybe, like if electricity just caught it, and it zipped, like immediately I was back. Now I had probably 2 weeks afterwards where I was worried because from the end of my last knuckle to the tip was tingling, and I thought maybe I had nerve damage or something because it was tingling for about 2 weeks. So that was just a weird little note of after my NDE. Now, when I was back in my experience, I could say, yeah, well, that was the part that I came back when my guide had me return and I reached toward the planet. But at the same time, going back to the portal, it seemed that when I said, well, I'm out of here, and took off after I was told these people are dead or they died, it seemed like at that point I went back also. So in my mind, I almost think these two experiences happened at the same time, and that when I went back, it just kind of all came full circle. So when I came back, I found myself in my bedroom, and I was in my body in a way, or trying to get into my body, but I couldn't feel any connection with my physical body, and that frightened me. And I didn't know why I couldn't get back in, and I could see my husband had come in the room, and he was in bed, and he was sound asleep. And it was pretty dark, and I just kept trying to get in my body, and I became frantic because I don't like the feeling of being in between anything. I've always had a thing with I like to be either here or there. I don't enjoy things like airplanes or bridges, or I love getting to where I'm going and being there, and don't do well with the in-between part. So I was just going into panic, like I'm not in my body, and yet I wasn't on the other side either. So I was getting really upset, and then my guide is telling me, go through the throat, over and over, go through the throat. And I just kept sending my energy through the throat of my body over and over. And at one point, it was almost like maybe if there was air in my body, that it passed through my mouth, and the jaw kind of dropped, and there was this noise that almost sounded like the sound of a toad or a frog. Like it it was just air passing out. It wasn't even a sound I felt like I made. And at that point, my husband kind of moved a little and said, "Amy," and that was it. And I still was trying to continue going through the throat, and so I'm throwing my energy through. And a second time, there was that kind of like this sound that came out, or like that a low toad sound or something. And that's when my husband kind of reached over and he grabbed onto my arm or something, and he was going, "Amy." And then he jumps up and I can see him running over to the light switch, and he flips the light on and he looks over at the bed, and I saw around his hairline he had just like instant sweat coming off of the hairline, and his face just went like wax. And he goes over and he just was grabbing me and shaking my body, and my understanding from my guide was, as long as he's touching you, his hands are on you, it's going to be okay. And so I had me connect with my body, and that's when I opened my mouth big and started breathing, and was definitely, back in my body. So then he's taking me out to the living room and sits me down on the couch. What happened, of course, and he's saying, "Is this an emergency? Do I need to call 911? And I'm telling him adamantly, "You're not calling 911. I knew I was perfectly fine. I was better than ever before. And the last thing I wanted was a doctor." So, nothing against doctors, because I have a daughter who wants to be a doctor, and but she would like to do heart surgery someday, and I'm all for that. But at this point, I was not up for going to doctors for much of anything for myself. And so he's sitting on the couch and he's saying what happened, and I'm trying to tell him, and I could not spit anything out. I didn't know how to say anything. I didn't know how to put words to it, and I remember just saying words like I said suicide, and there were people there, and it just was so fragmented at that point, and I didn't even know how to say what happened first or last, but I just kept trying to say things, and he was just, he kind of reminded me of, a cat that's kind of freaked out, and they're hunched over and their hair is up, and he knew something big had happened. And after this point, he started telling me, "You need to write this down. It's so much, you need to write this down or you're going to forget." And I hesitated on that because obviously it sounded a little crazy, and I didn't want to get judged, of course, and I just wanted to be careful, and it was everything that I needed, and I kind of wanted to hold it. So it took me a long time before I was willing to even post it online, but he kept saying, "You've got to write it down," because he was thinking I would forget it. Now I haven't ever forgotten any of it, but I'm glad that I eventually did start writing it down. Now, very soon after this experience, I told my husband, it might have been 1 or 2 days, and I try to understand that when I had this experience, I never ever would have dreamed that I would be telling people like this. So I didn't sit and take notes so that later I could tell people. And so a lot of things, like I'll say, then on Sunday I went to church, and yet I don't know, was that the day after or the next day? It's easier for me to talk about within the NDE than once I got back. But it was very soon after, and I remember my husband almost kind of being like, "Why do you need to go to church? You'd think you would be in bed for a week or just trying to be at home and relax a little bit." And I said, "No, it's not about church. I need to go to church. There's something, I keep getting this feeling that there's something there. I have to go to church." So I was just adamant about this. I went to church, and I was sitting in the meeting not knowing why I was pushed so strongly to go, and it was the part of the meeting that's kind of the most sacred part, the bread and the water, the sacrament. And I'm sitting there, and I feel this tremendous burst of energy from behind me, like, "Get up, and it's right now." And so it was kind of awkward to get up during that point, but I just stood up and walked out and went with it. And I go out into the main area, the foyer, and there's a woman sitting on a little couch, and she was heavily crying. And when I saw her, my sense was, this is the reason, but I didn't know why, what the connection was. And she had people around her that were comforting her, and I didn't want to be, "Here I am," I didn't know what to do, so I thought, well, I'll just go take a walk and maybe go to the restroom. And so I went to the restroom, and I came back out in a little while shortly after, and the people had dispersed, and she was still crying, so I came up to her and just kind of wrapped my arms around her and hugged her and said, what happened? Are you okay? Kind of thing. And she said, no, I'm not. They just found my daughter. She's dead in LA, and she was just very upset. And when she said that, I got the quick flashback to that girl who had talked to me in my NDE so closely and was like, tell her this, tell them that. And I thought, oh my word, how do I? And I didn't want to be wrong, because that would make it horrible if I was wrong. And so I just said, do you think that maybe tomorrow we could talk about this, or sometime soon you could share with me? And I said, and when she said yes, which was surprising because of the state she was in, but she said yes, I said, could you bring a photo? Because her daughter had such an unusual look. If this was her daughter, it would be very easy for me. I knew I wouldn't even have to look for long. It would be instantly, it's either her or it's not her. And so she said, yes, I'll bring a photo. And she shows up the next day at my house on Monday, and she brings a photo, and it's black and white. And I was looking for the colors in the color of her hair, the colors of her eyes, or the color of her eyes. And I started to say, though, because as soon as I saw the black and white, I knew it was her. I knew without a doubt it was her, even without the colors. So I started by saying, did your daughter have this very unusual reddish color in her brown hair? Like, there's very unusual color of red. And I started to describe the unusual green color of her eyes. And she was saying, yes, and kind of like, how do you know this? And that's when I told her, I think, if you don't mind, I want to share something that just happened to me, because I think I might have seen your daughter. And so she was interested, and I told her what had happened to me and how there was this young woman that came up, and I started to give her the information. And I started telling her about how this young woman had told me that right before she died, she had begun to sing, and that this brought her great joy. Now, the mother and daughter had been estranged, and so it was a difficult situation for the mom, because she had been apart from her daughter for a while. It just makes it all the heavier at heart. And so I was telling her these things, like the daughter had said, please tell them that I started to sing and I loved singing. And now in my NDE, I didn't bring this up, but she had performed, she had sung for me, this young girl, and I was able to tell the mom what she sounded like and how she sang, and that she really did have a beautiful voice. It wasn't just that she liked to sing, she really had a beautiful voice. And the mother was saying, I heard this from, I believe, one of the siblings who had been in contact said, yeah, she had started to sing before she died and was really loving this. And I was able to explain what she had felt while she was dying, and how she said, tell them I'm not in any pain, but she regretted not being able to stay longer and be able to learn more and experience more, but please tell them that I'm free, I'm not in pain, and I'm happy. And there were a number of personal things that I was able to go through with the mom, and the mom was just, it was a relief, because they all connected and they were right and appropriate. And about a week or so later, she came back to me and said that they got the coroner's report, and that she felt it matched what I had told her about what had happened to her daughter, the reason that had happened. So for me, I think that was a little bit of a gift for me, because it was just something I could kind of connect to the other side. And in my own mind, even if everyone thought, well, you're crazy, it helped me, like, well, I'm going to hold on to it, because at least I have that from it. And I think, for the mom, of course, it was very comforting for her to have that. Now, after my near-death experience, I had this whole time period that I refer to as an ADE, or after-death experience, because, and I can't even begin really to get into it, because it's like going into another near-death experience. But so many incredible, miraculous things happened, and on for, especially in the first 2 weeks after my experience, it was just mind-boggling for me, because I was still in in a way, I was almost still ringing in at the frequency of where I had been. And so I was looking at things and seeing things almost interdimensionally, or like there was more than one layer to everything. And I couldn't even talk because I was looking at things like a chair and just looking at the leg of the chair and in total awe, because I could see this consciousness that comes from that original source seed or God that was running through everything. And so I was just in this like nonstop crying, and then I would laugh, and I was just in so much awe because I was in this element and this being, you know, as I understood it before my experience, you know, where I used to pray and pray to reach out. I remember being in bed at night and putting my hand out and just, I trust, so I'm just going to wait in bed, and I would wait and wait because I just thought God was eventually going to put his hand out, and we would connect, and here God was in this experience where there was nowhere that this wasn't, and so this was really amazing to me, and I could see things had this vibration, and I could see light around everything, and it may sound kind of mystical or woo-woo kind of, but really my understanding was that it's totally normal, and there's a science to it, and even things like if we talk about light being around something, it's around everything anyway, because it's energy, and there's light that comes from energy, but we're in this frequency where we can't see as much as we could see if we were ringing at a higher vibration. So it was very sensible, and it wasn't just, you know, weird, and it's just that I could see so much more, kind of like how the dog can hear really high sounds and we can't. It doesn't make the sound really mystical so much. It's just, you know, it was just really neat for me to be able to see so much at once. So this was going on for quite a while, and everything that was happening was just so incredible to me. Like the kids, I'd have one of my kids just kind of bound across the room, and because I was now seeing people differently, like each person is so unique, it's almost like they have this whole universe inside of them that's unique just to them, and this equation that's just theirs, that they would, one of the kids would run across the room, and it would take my breath away because I felt like I was seeing this galaxy running across the room, and I'm like, and they'd make it to the other side without exploding, and I was just like, oh my gosh, because it was just so, everything was miraculous. Everything was so miraculous to me. Every moment, every breath that's happening, every connection that we make personally is just the most beautiful, miraculous thing. If we could see what was really going on behind all of this, and how much is involved in each one of us, and how beautiful it really is in the bigger picture, we would really just be in awe all the time, which I can see why maybe we need to not be in that state all the time, because I couldn't even function. And I was, you know, going from laughing to crying and things like that. It's, you know, people could have legitimately said she needs to be locked up, and I would probably understand. I remember after my experience, I had the simplest situation where 2 cable guys showed up at my house, and if we talk about what I discovered is the divine having a sense of humor, just things are funny. But 2 cable guys show up at the house, and they were wearing their uniforms for work, and they were there to hook up the cable for the TV. And I guess my husband had made an appointment, and he had to go to work right after my NDE. He had to be at work, very busy taking care of the family, and so I was at home in this state with the kids and just trying to figure out how to function. And the cable guys show up, and when I opened the door, I saw them like how the divine sees them, and it just like I couldn't stop laughing. And I was trying not to be rude, but to me they looked like, if you imagine little kids going into the closet and trying clothes on and trying to look really serious and showing up at the door and being like, we're the cable guys. and I just was like, I can't describe it. And so I was like, oh, okay. I brought them in, and they were just really serious about their job, like, we're here to hook up the TV. And to me, it was just so funny because I was so disconnected from things like television and watching football or, sitcoms and stuff like that. But, my husband he needs his time to relax and kind of stop thinking because he's at work all day. And so I just didn't realize that this appointment was coming. And while they were hooking it up, they were asking me really simple questions like, okay, so what channel do you want? Do you want ESPN? Do you want the Cartoon Channel? And everything they were asking me was busting me up. And it got to where I felt like I was being rude because they have an important job. There's nothing that isn't important. Everything that people do is a part of their own vital experience, and it's all beautiful, really. It's just that it felt totally different to me. So I had to I told them, I'm really sorry, I think I'm sick or something. And one of the guys said, did you take, I think he said, is it Robitussin or NyQuil? He said, did you say take some NyQuil? And I was just like wiping the tears and blowing my nose. And I finally said, you know what? You guys can hook up anything you want. I gotta leave the room. And so I had to leave because I knew at some point it was gonna just look like I was being rude, And so I said, well, just whatever you want, and call my husband, please. But I saw people from then on, like the way we see toddlers when they're playing. And I see that despite how we age here, we get older and we take ourselves seriously and we think, I have this important thing I'm doing. That the divine just is like, lighten up, it's okay, you can lighten up. And I tended to be so serious that from what I came from. I worried so much. I thought things were so serious, and I wanted to please God, and I prayed so much. And now through the divine, I was seeing it's totally okay to just have fun and laugh. And I was laughing so much, I was wheezing, and I didn't even know I had asthma. I don't know, maybe wheezing is an asthma, but I was just wheezing, and it was all okay. I wasn't offending anyone. Something I want to mention before I finish up is that one of the feelings I had when I was out of my body in this universal part where I was with my guide was I had this enormous gratitude and love for what all of this was, and it was so deep, and there was a level of almost like I could feel my own meekness, and you do want to kind of bow to it in a way. I didn't have the feeling of like I need to bow, but it's almost like where something is so amazing, you almost just collapse to it because you love it so much. And yes, I did have that, and yet at the same time, what that is, what the divine, what God is, I felt all of that more than I could ever feel it coming back to me, and feeling that level of love and gratitude for me. And it was for me personally, for exactly who I am at every level of me and everything I've ever been through, beyond even what I know of in this lifetime. And it was so grateful to me and loved me so much. And I almost felt as if it was bowing to me. And so there was this mutual adoration and love. And that also helps me because coming back into the world, I know not only to lighten up, but I know the level of love. There's this gratitude for us because in a way, it's like when we become embodied in the physical, we're learning through our senses and through suffering and joy and all these different levels. We're picking up on so much information, learning how to be balanced, evolving in the mind. And as we do this, everything that happens to us is in a way, it comes together, and what we call the divine is able to receive that information and our learning and our growth. And that's part of the whole intelligence of why it's intelligent, why it knows, why it is, we think, oh, it's beyond us, it's so much more intelligent. And yet, it's like I understood that it was saying, but this is because of those willing to go down into the body. And I understood that their feeling to us was almost like, you guys are the superheroes who go into the physical body and you experience the suffering, and we have nothing but gratitude and love, and we wish for you and hope for you. So I really feel more compassion toward myself now and toward others. And as far as judging people in my life, where I used to think, oh, well, how do I see this person? And how do I see that person? And what about this situation? Oh, is that wrong or right? Now I just know there's no way I can know everything. I can't look at any situation or one person and know it all. You know, I can choose what works best for me, what seems to click with me the most and help me be the healthiest and most balanced, but I can't really judge things the way that I did before. I don't know. I still can say, you know, I don't know anything, because as long as I'm in that space where I keep my frame of mind open, and I kind of think of the symbol of a cup or a chalice maybe, and as long as I keep that continually empty, it just keeps filling and more comes in. And it's become very important to me that even with my experience, I hold it in me, and yet at the same time, I still kind of like to remain just like that. My prayer, as far as what changed with me, if I go into some quick details of, you know, what changed, everything changed. I didn't have anything about me that didn't change after my experience. When I prayed, it became more of a prayer that I'm always in. I'm praying right now. And it's not that somewhere in my mind I'm going, oh God, please help me, you know, when I'm giving this talk. And I'm not doing that. I'm in a prayer because I feel now that oneness. I know I'm in that oneness with what God is, and I feel like I'm walking with it, and my intention stays with me all the time, where I'm always holding that basic prayer of let me walk in the will, in the highest will, because I know the highest will is the best way for the most joy and balance and happiness. And it's just always there. I don't need to think of words. And so it's kind of become like an unceasing prayer. Now, the 7 days of the week that came up during my experience, I came to, when they said prepare for the seventh day, there's a number of levels of things that came with that would be too much here. But one thing that came to me, the idea of the Sabbath for me became this understanding that the Sabbath is a symbol of rest, and there's something about octaves, you know, that are in the number 7, and that there's this space of rest. And what I feel now is that I want to walk in the Sabbath, that it's always the Sabbath, kind of like the prayer that's unceasing. And in this place, I can feel a rest that will always be, because I know everything is okay. I don't need to be out there begging and searching and crying, please explain. I have this inner rest, and I call that my inner Sabbath. And so it took all the outer symbols of what I thought was Sabbath, and it's become my inner. I did end up, it took some time, but I did end up leaving my religion, so that's something that changed. And that was not easy. A lot of things were easier than that. That was hard because the religion I came from was a very strong community, and it was really all I knew. And, you know, my family was very big, and I didn't do a lot outside of my religion, but I realized that for me to continue to thrive and do well, coming back into it and trying to do it for me almost felt like I was trying to put clothes on that were way too small for me. And I'm not saying that, I don't mean to demean in any way, it's just that I couldn't fit inside of certain limitations or areas where you can't this and yes that, and it was bigger than that for me. And as long as I could feel, as long as I was trying to kind of put one foot out of it and one foot in, it was just becoming too uncomfortable for me, and I wasn't doing well. So I knew for me personally I needed to leave. All of my ideas of how life is changed, of course, and a lot of people will ask me about, you know, how did you get better, and, you know, with your health, how did that improve? And I bring up, you know, my eating did change. I ate very purely, very simply. That helped. One of the things that came up, because I was traveling around the planet and I saw wheat, a field of wheat, and this is when the whole idea of tainted food came up, and so I kind of was avoiding wheat for a long time, and all my inflammation was going down. So I don't, do things like, I don't do a lot of gluten, but I like to be careful because I don't want people leaving and going, oh, this is the prescription for everyone. But there were things that were specifically helpful for me. I don't know why, but when I came back, I couldn't touch meat again. I just stopped. I saw things differently. So that's just, it's not other people's thing, like this is how you should do it. But for me, that's something that changed. Because my mind changed, I feel like that's a lot of why I started getting healthier as well. It's not just from the food, but my mind was a less acidic environment as I began to have joy and trust. The bitterness, the acidity in me, the inflammation, everything kind of came together. I left my political way. I didn't go to the opposite side and say, well, now on that side, I couldn't be part of, I could, and yet I wasn't calling myself, I'm this category, or I'm that, so whatever this group says, I follow them. I started getting rid of stuff. I found myself doing that naturally, where I was just going around and I didn't want clutter. I wanted space to be open and free, and maybe this is part of how much I love that feeling of the consciousness and that divine moving through it, and I love that so much. I didn't necessarily want too many things. I don't know exactly why, but I wanted things more simple. I didn't have a strong need to shop and get things to put on the counter and to be cute. They didn't call to me the same way, so things became more simple. Of course, the sense of humor thing came in. Feeling part of everything was a big thing. I think I explained that everyone is me. Understanding that there is order. The idea of reincarnation, I didn't have this before my experience, and when I came back, I don't know that I had that word, but I had a sense that there was more than what I know of in this lifetime, and yet when people do bring it up with me and have asked me about it, and they tell me how they see it, I have something similar, but mine involves something a little different that I don't have time for tonight, but I did come back with some of that. I had electrical sensitivity problems with, I don't prefer to even have a lot of, holding electrical things a lot, so I don't use my phone a lot, and I think I'm getting better at this point, but in the beginning there was a lot of electrical stuff that I was sensitive to, metal and even wind. I'm still really sensitive to wind, and I try not to talk about it a lot because it can get annoying, but things like that. Now, before my NDE, I wasn't one of those people that was a certain way, had the NDE, and then all of a sudden I was sensitive to everything. I actually grew up very, very sensitive to a lot of these things already. I had a lot of activity around me as far as really interesting things happening, and other people would notice what was around me, and just being by nature very sensitive, and I would naturally pick up on things, and have a history behind the NDE as well. I have this understanding that that death is a beautiful thing, and I don't even necessarily prefer to use the word death, but we have to use words here. And something that I carry with me that's helped me a lot when I'm having a really hard time, because I still have a hard time, and I still have emotions, and I get cranky, and sometimes I'm really mean even. I have this understanding that we can die at any time. We can let go, we can start over, and it's totally okay. We don't have to carry all the stuff. We can say, today I die to this. Not necessarily say, but we can have experiences while conscious and living where it would be like an NDE, where we just let go and start again. And maybe we'll even pick up on some of the same things, but it's a relief for me now to know I don't have to carry like, oh my gosh, I did all these things wrong in the past. And I mean, yes, I can feel like maybe I shouldn't have done such and such, but I always have this like, I can push restart. It's okay. I can get up and we can restart, and that's helped to make things lighter for me as well. I don't have the feeling that I need to believe in something. When people say, oh, do you believe in this or do you believe in that? It's almost like I have a hard time even understanding the question now fully, or knowing how to answer, because it's almost beside the point for me now. I understand, and yet there's a part of me that's like, or like if someone's like, well, do you believe in the church now? And I'm thinking like that, it seems like you just said, do you believe in sandwiches? Like what? I don't know, yes and no, I'm like, I guess, that's something that's kind of different for me. I don't feel I need to believe in things, I feel like I need to be. So when I, talk to my kids, I say, be love, be peace. And really it made things more simple for me to have my near-death experience, because there was so much complication in my mind before where I was trying to be perfect all the time, and that's a big goal coming from the religion I come from, to reach perfection, and there were just so many things I was trying so hard to be and do, and from my NDE coming back, I just want to be love, and be those things, be peace, and it just became very much more simple. I'm going to wrap it up now and then see if we want to do questions, but when in wrapping it up, I want to share something that I really connected strongly with after my NDE. Saint Francis, I didn't have saints in my religion that I came from, but I started really appreciating stories about mystical experiences that people have had, and saints, and a prayer that I found right away that just was everything to me, that really connected with me, is this one. Let me be an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, harmony. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
Thank you, Amy.